Is the roll call then?
Just
Or she just
No,
does?
we don't do roll call.
Okay.
We're not required to. She just knows who's here. So,
I see a bag.
Okay, guys. At 8:32, we'll convene the Mendocino County Employees Retirement Association Board to order, and we have a majority of quorum here, and first thing on the agenda is Pledge Allegiance. And Patrick, want to lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Second thing on our agenda is public comment, and do we have any public comment on non-agenda items? Not seeing any, we'll go to the consent calendar, which is the minutes of December 13th, December 17th retirement report, trustee education and training annual report, and the monthly preliminary financial report. Any comments on the consent calendar, or is there a motion, or any comments on the consent calendar?
I move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay.
I can do that today.
Is that different?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we'll just accept the consent calendar by acclamation, that I don't see dissents. We just file it, right? Then item number 2 is discussion and possible action regarding any, well, we did that discussion. 3, discussion and possible action regarding the investment matters. We have the monthly investment report. Do you want to review it?
absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Trustees, you have the monthly investment report before you. You can see that our total fund, I'm at the bottom of the second page of the report. Total fund at the end of December 2017 was $520 million. This is a preliminary report. That line showing you that we have over $12 million in cash is inaccurate. We have far less cash than that. A lot of these negatives that you're seeing up here are due to dividends that we reinvest in those funds, so they get moved to cash on the preliminary report, but they'll get adjusted when we get the quarterly report next month, and our cash balance is significantly lower than that. So the performance in the month, 1.2% rate of return versus the benchmark at exactly 1.2. For the quarter, the fourth quarter of 2017, our total fund return was 3.8%, slightly behind the benchmark, but the year we did very, very well at almost 19%, well ahead of the benchmark for the one-year period. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them or call on Stan's expertise for anything I don't know, which is a whole lot.
I just had one generally. So now that we've set all the funds and gone through those reviews over the last year, when is the next time that we really go through and reevaluate all of if there's not a problem?
If there is not a problem, so what we will do going forward is we have the RFP for investment consultants scheduled for later this year. Once we go through that and get the new investment consultant, and typically those are 3-year contracts, in the first year is when you do asset allocation review.
Okay.
So we'll look at how much do we want in domestic equities, international fixed income, and those kinds of things. Do we want any new asset categories? And then we'll drill down. If we want new asset categories, we'll do hires in those spaces, and then drill down into the existing managers and review those. So I would say it would be in 19 that we would return to that.
Got it.
Starting with asset allocation and then moving down from there.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to share with you. Do you want mine on my computer? Because I couldn't get in the
Do you want to accept the monthly investment report?
Are we going to take that dollar away from Dodge and Cox?
As I said, it's a preliminary report.
Read that as 20 almost 23 years ago, I set up an account for my daughter and I closed it out and it earned a penny in interest between, and it's been sitting in that account for 23 years. And I've contacted them numerous times and they won't get rid of a penny.
Is it earning interest?
But in 23 years, it hasn't earned a penny's interest. You would think it would have done.
Okay, do we need a motion to approve?
I don't believe we do. It's just a report.
Okay, now we're on to discussion possible action regarding the 2018 board work plan, item number 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trustees, you have a number of items before you as part of this. You have the accomplishments. I always like to, when we turn over a new year, like to put forward everything we've gotten done in the past. And it is quite a list. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but we have gotten quite a bit of stuff done. I feel really good about the progress we've made. Next, turning to, and if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer those. I'm not trying to blow past the accomplishments, but I think it is important that we put those out there.
Congratulations.
Well, congratulate yourself, not me. The next item is the work plan, the proposed work plan. So let me just pull it up here so we can all.
Thank you. I promise I did my homework, everybody. I did it on my computer because I could not get this to work.
So after our discussion at the December meeting about the work plan and the prioritization, I took all of that information and filtered that through and brought you some additional information here. You can see that for a number of these projects, we have put a very, very rough estimate of time and potential costs to conduct these projects. And I've updated all of the timelines or deadlines for these projects. So I will say that this project is under, like I've mentioned before, the disaster recovery is underway. I estimate there's probably about 160 hours left to complete that project, get the plan finished, put in place, and all the moving pieces set. The risk assessment, there's an either-or option here for you. Either we can do it internally, because I've done a risk assessment before, and you're going to get my level of expertise on risk assessment, which is not as good as if you went outside and had someone that really does this a lot do it. And I estimate that's going to take about 160 hours of time, or a very much, I'm just shooting in the wind, $40,000 to have a consultant come in and do it, and it's going to take 40 hours of staff time is my guess there. So that's kind of an either-or approach that we can think about on a going forward basis.
Exactly what risk are we assessing? And is this risk assessment end up being the same long formula that we got to endure at UC Berkeley's program that basically puts in a lot of numbers and curves and comes up with a risk number, which is really pretty esoteric in my view. And spend a lot of money and time to get to this esoteric number on something that, if we look at our portfolio, is what everybody else in our 70 pension plans that we're up against does, and they've already spent the money for it.
Right. There's, to my way of thinking, there's a very significant difference between risk and uncertainty. uncertainty we talk about a lot in the investment space, and that's volatility of returns. We have some degree of expectation about what those will be, and we can calculate those based on historical patterns. That, a lot of people consider that risk. I don't think of that as risk, I think of that as uncertainty. Risk, to me, is the things you can't plan for. And it's not just in the investment space. It's everything else that could have an impact on the association.
Black swans.
Black swans, just recalling, employee fraud, theft or fraud, something happening to our building. Something happening, well, one of the big risks I see is the county economy, and how that impacts us. The county government, the courts, and us, I think, is a big risk. So it's a lot, when I say risk assessment, it is much, much broader than investments. Investments is probably the smallest piece of risk in my mind. Because we're relatively conservative in how we invest. We still deal with uncertainty, but there's much less risk than uncertainty in the investment space in my mind. There's still, we could still have a 20% downturn in the market, and that impacts us. But it's all the other risks that we don't have a good handle on right now, I think. And that's what this project would attempt to identify and quantify, and what the process that I've used before is you identify every conceivable risk you can think of. And then you identify what's the loss if it happens, and what's the likelihood that it happens, and then you create a heat map of, well, if X happens, we have this enormous loss in terms of dollar value, but the probability of it happening is 1 in 5,000. So when you heat map it, it's just the product of those two numbers that gives you an expected loss. Whereas if you have something with a moderate loss figure, but a much higher probability, then that can become something much more important to focus on than the really big loss type of thing. So,
James?
yes.
So, do you know what the practice is of the other 37 X systems regarding this issue?
I do not.
I mean, the concern from my perspective, from a fiduciary duty standpoint, is all other 19 systems and CalPERS and CalSTRS, and they all do, they have an outside consultant do a risk assessment every X number of years, and we were the only ones that didn't do it. I'd be concerned that we're an outlier, and so I'm not familiar with this issue, but I'm not sure where the board wants to go on this, but my thinking is there may be some value in having some outside eyes look at this. I don't know about $40,000, but anyway, that's my preliminary thinking on that.
And I will say the $40,000 was a pure guess. It could be a fraction of that. I purely guessed. So.
And I'm not saying one thing about the dollar amount, but you just mentioned we've got now $520 million. So I'm not trying to say $40,000 is some change, but we just have to have a perspective.
Jerry?
To answer that, about 8 years ago at CalSTRS, we determined that we had not done a decent risk assessment. And it was done by outside consultants, even with a very large staff. And I think this is something that we should do. I think we should do it by hiring a consultant, because I don't think that you, James, have either the time or, in this case, the expertise to bring to us the things that we don't think about at these meetings. And both of the big systems, and then increasingly nationally, the systems have all gone to looking at risk as a strong factor. And I appreciate the uncertainty comment because it does separate it out. But, you know, we're a relatively insular group that sits in a small room once a month, and I don't think we can possibly, as a board, be expected to know all the pieces that could play a risk here. And I don't think you have the time to do it.
Jerry may have answered part of my question, but I noticed that we ranked risk assessment very highly on our priority list, and I guess I'm wondering, everybody who ranked it highly, what were we thinking about? What type of risk are we talking about? So when STRS did it, what types of risks are
They're the kind of things you don't think about, like an employee, you know, like an earthquake. You know, I'm not an expert on this, so I can't even say what all the pieces are. But I think we need to, I believe we need to look more at risk rather than less, because I think that's one place, that's something that hasn't been done as far as I can see over the years. So I'd like to see us bring an outside person in to do it.
So I have a question. Would it be helpful if maybe before someone is hired, maybe before the RFP is sent out, that the board gets a copy of maybe 3 risk assessments, maybe one by CalSTRS and or CalPERS, and at least one by a 37 Act agency, just so we can kind of see what they were looking for?
Yeah, we will definitely gather more information before we start doing anything. You know, what I wanted to put forth today, this is still a draft plan for us for the rest of this year and into 2019. I wanted to have these kinds of conversations. Does the board think we need to bring in, do you like what you're seeing here with on the work plan? And for these kinds of issues, do you think consultant or internally? And if it's internally, then we have to think about timeframes, because that may adjust some things. If we go outside to do this, I still think the first quarter of next year is a good time frame to get this done. You know, we don't have anything in the budget for doing it this year. And to be honest with you, I don't think we have the time this fiscal year in the next 6 months to get moving on anything. You know, we've got a number of projects going on currently, and I just thought of one that may not even be on here. Oh yeah, the actuarial audit is ongoing. That's, you know, we've got a number of projects that are currently underway. That I just don't think we have the time to start this before the end of this current fiscal year. But I think if we plan on starting it in the new fiscal year, we can get it done by the first quarter of 2019.
Richard?
So, looking at this thing pretty generally, you got first quarter, you have one item, second quarter an item, third quarter an item. So basically, these are project, finish, start new project lists, or will there be any overlap?
Oh, there's a lot of overlap.
Okay.
There's a lot of overlap. And there's always a lot of overlap. And
So could we, with that said, as each one of these start, can you plot it? Like I'm used to, you know, you go to a contractor meeting the first day, you say, give me your calendar. Okay, you're gonna lay floors way out here. How long's that gonna take? Show me what's gonna happen before.
so a Gantt chart?
Yeah, so basically the board is aware, pretty at a glance, where a project is, if it's fired up, if it's not. Because, I mean, this gets a note on it, started, you know, April 1, completion, proposed completion, August 3rd, whatever.
Okay.
I mean, I would think that's not too big a burden to toss that in.
creating the Gantt chart is not a huge burden necessarily, but,
Or use this in a column that shows start date.
okay. I think that might be a better way to go.
Rose, yeah, I do too, actually.
Rather than, because a Gantt chart, you need at least one page for each project for a Gantt chart. And
It's a pretty
that gets
simple-
overwhelming. I
It's a
think.
simpler request than
Okay.
a chart.
I think that's perfectly reasonable. An inception date and due date.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we can make that happen. Unless there's objection from the board about changing the work plan. Okay. So what I'm hearing on risk assessment is consultant, and starting that in the new fiscal year, we'll have to include that in the budget. By the time we get to budget preparation, we'll have more information, and we'll include that as part of the budget preparation process. Kind of what other plans have done, some things we can look at, and have a better feel for what the numbers might be.
When I voted for risk assessment, I was thinking in terms of our investments.
So that's the stress testing.
Along those lines, yeah. And I really agree with Dan that we ought to look at some other of these reports, because I am often critical of government just throwing away money on useless studies just to make themselves feel good. This is our pensionados' money, and I'm not for spending money to get the obvious answer just to say that we did it. So, but I think others, we're not going to be so unique from what others are. Good idea, Dan.
So yes, we'll gather a lot more information and bring that through the budgeting process. And the audit and budget committee, I think, would be a good avenue to really vet that and talk about what makes sense there, if that's acceptable. So the legislation request, after our discussion last time, I'm estimating that's about 80 hours total. And I'm hoping it will be less than that, but I'm not convinced. And the deadline there is the third quarter. And what this board has talked about is trying to use the SACRS avenue, propose it to the SACRS legislative committee with the hope that they will adopt that, and then SACRS as an organization can push those legislative items that we would like to see done. There will be some work ahead of time to get everything fleshed out and know exactly what we want to propose. And my thinking there is we'll draft some proposed legislation and bring it to the board to talk about the specifics of what that looks like. And work through this board first to make sure we know exactly what we want, and then we'll go to SACRS. So we'll be starting that in the not too distant future so that we're well ahead of schedule for going to SACRS at the fall conference. Moving on to the second page, unless there are any other questions on the first page. So I do want to take a moment to stop at the top line here, client feedback monitoring. We are now getting feedback on directly from our clients after they go through the retirement process. So we're doing surveys using MailChimp and SurveyMonkey to send an email to people that have gone through the process. It's a short 3-question survey. How satisfied were they with the experience? How satisfied were they with the staff? And how comfortable are they with the overall retirement? And then there's an open-ended 4th question. As you would expect with most surveys, the response rate is relatively low. We had 3 people that retired, 13 retirees in the 4th quarter. 3 of those responded to our survey. And the average across those three was 4.67 out of 5 on a rating schedule. So, it- by my way of thinking, a 4 and above is success. So I feel like we're on track here and we're doing what we need to do. It's taken us a little while to get there. 2.5 years ago, almost 2.5 years ago, we had our offsite where we said we wanted to do this, and now we're finally there. So we're happy about that.
Question on that one. What of those who didn't give us a 5, are we going to be looking at suggestions and bringing them back to the board or staff, board, whatever, at some point to see?
We are definitely looking at those
Okay.
and evaluating, if we get comments, even if we get 5s, we always look at the comments. One of the comments was, we need to do more to communicate.
Okay.
And it,
Consider survey 3.
so the suggestion was that we send an email when the estimate is ready, and we send an email with, we need this paperwork from you, and we send an email when we got this paperwork and now we need this, instead of what we have currently is what I call a punch list. Here's what we need from you, and it's a punch list. The recommendation or the comment was, well, you should communicate to us every time you need something.
Yeah, no, I was talking about useful comments.
So,
They're all useful,
Only
right?
3 people respond.
Yeah.
they're all useful. There's always something to learn. And being mindful of communicating with clients is something that we should always be aware of. So,
Would there be a way of, assuming that they're enrolled in Pension Gold, they can log on, would there be a way so they could as they log in, they can see what on the punch list has been received? Or is deemed complete? Because, I'm wondering if there's a case maybe where someone could send something and they think they've responded, but it wasn't really what the agency needed, and so therefore it's not deemed complete. I'm just guessing. I know that's sometimes the case with
right.
permits, let's say.
We would have to look into that and see if that's, the best answer is, I don't know, but we can look into it.
James, a question on, with the adoption of the tax reduction that's coming up,
Uh-huh.
will the system be changing the withholding for retirees? And if so, are you notifying retirees of that?
So we use the tax tables, and if the tax tables change, so we had to,
I know we all had to change the way we
Right.
are withholding.
because of IRS and state law regarding taxes, we had to change, all the retirees had to change how they withheld, so they had to choose a schedule. Now, everyone that's a retiree is on a schedule, so married to, single, 0, whatever it is. When the tax tables change, the tax withholding will update automatically. Is there a notification sent out if there's a tax table change?
No,
Okay.
I don't think this has ever happened before.
no. Although when we went through that process, because it was so tedious working with each member, we explained to them that that was the main reason for using a tax table, so that as they update and change each year, their withholdings will also change. And we do anticipate additional withholding changes every year once the 1099-Rs are distributed. And we have a big influx of tax changes.
My first thought was the IRS knew this tax reduction was coming long before the tax deduction came, because first time in the history of the retirement system, we told people you can't just specify a dollar amount, you have to use the tables. More than a coincidence.
those two things were not coincidental. If I'm accurate, we should have been doing this for a long time, being on the tax tables. It's just prior to being on pension gold, the system was not set up to handle that. But we should have been on the tax tables for a long time. Is that, my memory's correct? Okay.
Yes, it's required.
Speaking of that, a little bit off work plan, but I do want to advise trustees, 1099 audits are going out next week.
Bless you.
And the process has been much smoother than in years past. Now that everything is on pension gold and it flows fairly easily, and we're working with a printer that just handles it all for us. It's much, much easier on us, much less staff time involved getting the 1099s out. We're very happy. I'm very happy about that, and I think staff is as well. So I'm going to turn back to the work plan. So there was some discussion last time about the joint meeting, and I changed. We originally had this on for 2018. I am proposing that we change it to 2019. And the reason for that is really the best meeting of the year for us to have a joint meeting is in January, when the actuary is coming in to make the presentation to the Board of Supervisors. So if I were going to target a meeting for us to have a joint meeting, it would be the January meeting. Obviously, we can't do that this year. So I would think January of 2019 would be a good time frame for us to think about having that meeting. From our end, haven't even entertained or entered discussions or even broached the idea with the Board of Supervisors and the Executive Office yet. Just, I wanted to throw that out there and get the board's thought on putting that off until 2019.
I don't have a problem.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I just have a question. Traditionally at these meetings, are there certain topics that we're supposed to cover, or is it kind of open to what everybody is interested
So,
in?
I mean, I think my recollection was, because I might have been chair of the board at the year that we had the joint meeting. Basically, each board developed issues that they wanted to discuss, and then we had a joint agenda.
Got it.
I think January of 19.
Is that,
Yeah.
I'm looking supervisor and chair here, if that, I mean,
Yeah, it makes sense.
okay. Okay. Okay, and then the bottom of this page is a lot of and this is the communication area, I'll remind you. There's a lot of information here around different things that we proposed for doing communication. So I did reach out to the actuary. We had a couple of actuarial things that we wanted to talk about that were on the prioritization list. One was an impact of PEPRA on the association. What does it mean for us? Got feedback from the actuary that they can do that for relatively cheap. They've done it for other systems because all they have to look at is the difference in contributions, because the unfunded liability and the funded ratio really are not affected by the new tier because the county's paying the same amount towards the UAL whether the member is a legacy member or a PEPRA member. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So they can do that relatively quickly. We could have, all I have to do is send an email and say, I want this done, and they can get it done and get it back to you this quarter if you like. It's not going to tell you that PEPRA has saved all this money. It's going to tell you if we hadn't done PEPRA, the county would have paid this much more in contributions over the past 4 years. I just want all of us to know that that's what we're getting. in this PEPRA analysis, PEPRA impact analysis. And if the board's okay with that, we'll proceed. If it's not what you want, or you want to think about something else, I'm happy to do whatever you like.
Why do we need to know that?
I don't know.
Well, so,
One of us must have asked.
one reason I thought would be interesting is because I was looking at a report that was given to the Board of Supervisors, and I assumed the retirement board around November, October of 12, which was prior to the adoption of PEPRA. Well, prior to the implementation of PEPRA, because the county was already looking at creating a new tier before the legislature passed PEPRA and required a new tier. And so I think my understanding is that there was a fair amount of work already done on this front. And then when the law came in, of course, everybody had to adopt a new tier. And at the time, there was again agenda summaries that went to the Board of Supervisors back around October, November 2012, prior to adoption, that showed a fairly significant reduction in contribution, especially if there was no COLA for the retirees. So they had several options, and they went with almost the least expensive plan that was on the table. There might have been one thing they could have gone before they didn't, but basically virtually everything that was an option to reduce the cost they went for, including the zero COLA versus a 1 or a 2% COLA. But just looking at the current contribution rates, I don't see, it looks like a less significant gap between the two, between the legacy and the PEPRA. And obviously, like James said, the contributions for the UAL are the same whether someone's a legacy or PEPRA, so that's obviously not going to be the difference. But the part of the plan that's supposed to be different in costs looks like it's not that different in cost. And so that's why I was asking, so why, when the board adopted what seemed to be virtually the least expensive plan that they could have, or at least was on the table for discussion, and it seemed like a fairly significant savings, why is it that now that it looks like the contributions are fairly close by the county for the employees who are in legacy or PEPRA plan? It just doesn't seem like the difference is all that great now compared to what it seemed like was predicted. But it may be predicted.
Will its big impact though be on the back end where they're not getting a call? That's where the real payday will come in.
Well, who knows? I mean, I guess to the extent that the UAL was at least partly created through COLAs that were maybe bigger than anticipated, or to the extent there was any errors in anticipation of COLAs, I guess you don't have that because there is no COLA. But I don't know that predictions of COLAs were inaccurate and that was a driving force in the unfunded liability.
And are we using a lower cost of living, a lower inflation factor at the same time? Or in our assumptions, aren't we using like a 2% inflation?
Three.
We
always have.
We always have?
I think
That's
Well, it
possible.
was 3 1/4, but we lowered it to 3 in the most recent experience study. So I pulled up the June 30th, 2017 valuation report, and the comparing Tier 3 general members to Tier 4 general members. So that's the majority of the legacy members versus PEPRA. The total contributions from the employer without the normal cost plus COLA contributions for the legacy members is 10.68%, and for the PEPRA members it's 7.53%. So a 3+ percentage point difference. When you look at just the normal cost component, it's only 0.5% difference. But when you consider the COLA contribution rate is where you get north of 3% difference.
Okay. Right, got it.
So
That's where the savings really was the lack
it's
of
in the
COLA.
COLA, yes.
Okay. So maybe we don't need a report. Maybe that answers.
That's the man.
Gee, cross that one off.
So What's the pleasure, is the pleasure of the board that there's no need for us to do this?
Done.
I don't see any.
I don't see any.
Okay.
Yay, look at how the progress you're making.
Another smiley face hits the list.
Oh, it doesn't get a smiley face, it just gets gone.
So there is a slight reduction absent the COLA because there were a few other reforms that were in the plan.
Right.
Such as a later retirement date to receive full retirement.
Right.
Okay, got it. And there were other changes in the formula.
Yes,
But the vast majority of the savings really is in the lack of the COLA.
yes,
Okay, and
absolutely.
that's what I remember the board hearing when they were choosing. The reason why they chose lack of a COLA was because there was such a big cost to the COLA.
Right. I believe it was trustee Knutson that said the only way to actually save money by implementing Pepper was to not have a COLA. That's the choices that the board of supervisors faced at the time.
I had a question too. Was a lot of that due to the fact that our county didn't have a lot of the practices that got other counties in trouble? It seems like we already had a lot of good policies in place.
I think that may have been a component of it, but what I think, and I'm speculating here, but what I think is that we had a relatively conservative benefit formula compared to a lot of other counties. There are counties that have 3% at 60 formulas, where ours is, for the legacy members, is 2% at 57. Well, the way the benefit formula works, it's final average salary times years of service times your multiplier. So if you're getting a 2% multiplier and you've worked for 25 years, then you're going to get half of your final average salary. If you have a 3% multiplier, you're getting 75%. So some other systems had much more generous benefit structures than what Mendocino County does for the legacy members. So
So a county like Sonoma that had 3% for its legacy and can't give 3% anymore is saving a whole lot more money than Mendocino County is.
I
As an example.
believe that would be accurate. Yeah,
Is it also true that Sonoma does not have a COLA?
that's correct.
And so the legacy members there had a higher formula, but a zero COLA.
That is correct, yes. Okay, so I will strike that project from the work plan. And then communication strategy. And I surreptitiously put that on there as getting done before we do these other communication pieces. Not so surreptitiously since I'm mentioning it. I still believe it's important to have our strategy before we start developing communication pieces. So, unless there's any major objections, we'll plan on getting the strategy done first and then developing other documents after that.
You've got like 20 hours down for a one-pager on the UAL, and you had that pretty well dialed in at our retreat. I think that was an eye-opener for a lot of us when you put it on the board.
I'm trying to remember what I put on the board.
Basically what we take in and what our expenses are.
Oh, okay,
and-
the cash
yeah,
flow.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
it was like, I know, aha moment for me anyway.
Right.
And I saw other heads bobbing, so that is pretty significant, I think, is it, at least for a way for trustees to be able to explain to members of the public in a simple, straightforward way that, things aren't as dire as some people may make them out to be.
Yeah.
And I think that would be really helpful for me as a board member to have that to really focus on as a response to people who raise that as the principal question that comes to us.
Okay. I can absolutely shoot you that, and I'll shoot it out to all trustees. I call it the pro forma cash flow analysis. It just looks at inflows versus outflows, ignoring investment returns. I can get that out,
You guys?
as long as I write it down. But there is,
Don't let perfection be the enemy of the good.
okay, noted. Okay. So that would definitely be part of the the plan at a glance document,
Mm-hmm.
which is envisioned as kind of a 3-page, here's how to answer a lot of the questions and criticisms that we get. And some of that will bleed over to the 1-pager, but some of it may not. Last time, there was also a POB 1-pager on here. It didn't quite make the list this time. And
POB plan.
pension obligation bonds. Before it comes back, I think we should have a conversation about, is that something that we really should be discussing in this kind of arena where we're trying to educate people? It's not our issue. It's the county's issue. The county chose to do it. We were the beneficiary of it, but it was the county's choice. We don't have to get off on that debate today. I just want to prime your mind to think about, is that really something that the Retirement Association needs to be trying to educate the public around?
That was very educational in and of itself.
I think there's a difference between the communication strategy of what we communicate to members and to the public versus information for us as trustees. Because some of the things, and I see maybe what Lee was asking for as well, is mainly just things that we learned, like at the retreat, that we need a refresher on.
Okay.
Not that we're going to share them with anybody else, we just want to understand it better ourselves.
Okay.
So when you talk about the POB, even if it's not something we should be educating the public on, we need to all be
Okay.
educated on it, so.
So, okay, I get you.
Makes sense.
That could definitely be part of the plan at a glance document, which the vision there is it's about a 3-page document, primarily designed for trustees to have an easy resource to answer questions.
Okay.
When someone says,
FAQs.
well, what about this POB thing? And another question I suspect you get a lot, well, the county took away our insurance, the retiree health insurance. Not our issue, but we get those questions, and I think we should be able to answer those. So,
Hey, James.
yes, sir.
So I agree that it's a county issue, but I have a vague memory of Sherry talking about how, I forget how many years that is from now, it seemed like it wasn't that many, but maybe it is, that once that comes off the books, because there's a lot of discussion about cash flow, that would, that's going to come off the books and significantly alter that.
Believe, is it, no, it's longer than that. I think it's
11 or 12.
2028?
2026, I think, maybe it's 2028.
Yeah.
What?
It's between 9 and 12 years that it rolls off. But yeah, that's definitely something that,
Richard?
So I think the concept that, and we're educated on that because there's probably only 2 people in the room, maybe 3, that can pass a test on the topic of the history and how it's implemented.
I hope you're not including me in that count.
I am actually, maybe 3, I said. You might get a D, but you pass. And I would guess that in the supervisor realm, there'd be no passing. And maybe Dan might get by it. But I think it is their issue. And I have certainly regurgitated the story 100 times I would say, trying to get people to understand what it was, why it was, and how it was beneficial. And it'd be nice to point to something instead of having it be me who was on the board, both boards when it happened, and you did it all for yourself, kind of shit. Excuse myself. Excuse me for talking like your president.
I think we look at this in terms of just FAQs.
Yeah, that's,
And don't forget, when you're doing the 2002 POBs, to include that some of the money went to refund the
Yes,
1996.
Yes.
And
Some
to induce people to, because you can't call pension obligation bonds, they're uncallable. We induce people to sell them back to us by giving them cases of Mendocino County wine.
That's right.
Is that right?
Wow.
That's the bonus question.
Sent to New York
Wow.
or Newport Beach.
So this may be a
People
different,
jumped on it.
this may be a different
I think
issue,
we
but
refunded 18 million or 15 million or something.
What was it, 30?
this may be a different issue than the UA one pager. I think it really is, but it does go back to the issue that it's, you know, I think it's 2026 when the county ends its annual payments on the pension obligation bonds. Personally, I would like to see the county take those same funds that it's putting in every year's budget towards pension obligation bonds, towards paying down the UAL. Whether it's through a new bond or just payment, annual payments, because currently the county's living with a budget that does not rely on those $8 million or $10 million a year for other services, and I'd rather see it pay down, accelerate the payment down of the UAL that's predicted in the work plan. So but again, but there is, the county now has the software. I still don't know. I don't know if you've been able to. I've been told I will get access to it. I still haven't had access to it. But the county did pay for software that was to plug in different numbers in terms of if you make bigger payments towards the pension system, how much benefit is there over the long term in terms of investment returns, such as maybe it's a few $1 million now that's in the pension gap fund that the county has. Like, what's the advantage of paying that money into the plan now versus, which obviously if money had been paid into the plan 2 years ago, when this 2 years of stock run would have had a really big impact. But anyway, so maybe it's separate from the UAL now, one pager, but I think there may be a value in the association advocating to the county about, you know, paying off the UAL sooner rather than later.
Absolutely.
in response to that, my approach would normally be, I want to educate, but not advocate. But if this board wanted to advocate, that's your call. Do you want to go advocate that they should do that? I'll go work that as much as I can when we get there. Yeah, I think I like the idea.
All we need is the info. We'll do the work with it.
Right.
Well, it certainly could be an item that we put on our 2019 joint meeting agenda, and you know, like that these are things that the retirement board thinks would be helpful for the county to look at as they pay off those bonds, redirect, you know, continue to use those funds for the pension plan, but to pay down the UAL.
We should talk.
I have thoughts.
We should talk.
Okay. Okay, any other questions, suggestions, comments, thoughts here on the second page? Okay, last page. The IT security audit. I think there is absolutely no way I can do anything, that any of our current staff can do anything on this. So if this is something the board really wants done, we're going to have to bring someone in to do it. In all honesty, there's a possibility that this could get folded under the risk assessment. And it could be both a risk assessment and IT security audit. But I don't know. I don't know if that changes the dynamics or if it needs to be really two separate things. There's a lot more work to be done to figure out what we want here and who can do it, and which is the best way to go. So, but I do feel it is important. You obviously feel it's important based on your prioritizing it very high. So. Actuarial audit is underway. We've submitted, I think, almost all the information to the auditor. They are conducting their work now. They will be here at the May board meeting, or they'll be teleconferencing in to present their report. Unless you want them here in person, but that will cost you an extra $2,500. So. Here's the other actuarial item, stress testing. So this analysis, the feedback from the actuary is it's not as big of a project as I thought it was. I was aware that they had done this project in Orange County, and I looked at some of the results there, and the big difference is in Orange County they have a large number of plan sponsors. I think they have 25 different plan sponsors that they have to deal with. So they had to do the analysis for each group of employees, and it was a much bigger project. For us, with one plan sponsor that's 95% of the plan, it's a much smaller project. And the proposal or the recommendation from the actuary was they could do this kind of a 3-scenario analysis of what happens to our actuarial situation, the UAL, the funded ratio, and the contribution rates under different scenarios. So one scenario is you have a really great investment year followed by a really bad investment year, and then you return to or assume 7% thereafter. Or you have a really bad year and you never have the catch-up year, and then you're back at 7% forever. So there's a number of scenarios that we could put together to stress test what our future looks like under different scenarios and see how comfortable we are with those. And that can be done in relatively short order for not a lot of money. They've done it for other plans, so they know exactly how to do it. And I would propose that we get that done and bring it to the board second quarter, if you're fine with that.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Now, that would be like, say, 3 scenarios plugged in at different times, so we get variance of each one of those scenarios. Like, you know, we have a good year this year, but a bad year next. Well, what if we have a bad year 5 years from now, or a bad year 15 years from now? You know what I mean? A variance, I mean, once they've got this formula, it's just a matter of when they plug in the different number in what year.
Right.
I mean, it's they've got the formula, it's just a matter of what numbers they put in it.
The
more the merrier on that, I think would be,
you can reach
very
overkill.
enlightening.
You can definitely reach overkill.
Yeah.
And honestly, if you're thinking about throwing in a bad year, the sooner you put it in, the better it is for stress testing purposes, because you can really see what happens to.
Same with the good year. I
Exactly.
mean, having this good year now, boy, is a boon for out in the future.
Right.
It's wonderful.
Right. So I'll talk with the actuaries and see what they can do.
So it's slightly different, I guess I was thinking slightly differently. What if you had variables where it's above or below the average, but what if the average was not 7%? And say, so good years, bad years, but the average, you plug in, say, 6.5, what does that do to the plan? That to me was more what I was thinking when we were looking.
That could certainly be a scenario that we throw in. Instead of averaging 7, what happens if we average 6.5? Before we go down this, what I would suggest is before we go down this road, we need to put some thought into what scenarios do we want to see?
Yeah.
And I think it would be best for me to come back to you with a proposal that we look at these scenarios and then talk about that next month, if you're comfortable with that. And then if you don't like one of my scenarios and want to do something else, we can change it. We can do as many scenarios as we want. It's just going to increase the cost to do those.
To this point, we have real life experience. We have the 2008 crash. We have the 2017 run. You put that on paper and then you flip the scenarios and you put the run in 2008 for 4 years and the crash in 2017, and you get an entirely different picture of the world. And I think that you could be as simple as doing those two projections to get the wild ass range of what could happen. And that's not a lot of work. Because the whole issue of compound interest and blah, 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 blah tells an incredible story really quickly with just reversing 2 scenarios like that. Just a thought.
Okay.
One other piece that I keep seeing out in the paper is the GASB recommendations. And this is what all pension plans need to be showing to have the correct UAL. Then I think we all know that GASB is basically just an accounting situation, but it's also something that we need to have at our fingertips if we're supposed to be adequately diffusing certain entities who are using the GASB rules to say that we're never going to meet our goals and we might as well declare bankruptcy. I think that that's a piece of information we all need.
Okay.
On the 3-pager or whatever.
Okay. Understood. Investment-wise, okay, so I'll bring back stress testing scenarios. To the board next month. And we'll plan on moving forward there. Investment-wise, we have the option, we're planning for the ESG divestment education next month. Cal will be here for their quarterly report, so we'll do that. Property maintenance plan we're still working on. We have 2 things left to get done there. So we have the RFP coming up later this year, with a deadline in 4th quarter of 2018, probably early 4th quarter is what we're thinking there. And you see I have a significant amount of estimated staff time there. I will be bringing a recommendation to the Audit and Budget Committee that as part of the consultant process for the RFP, that staff conduct on-site due diligence. This is one of the most important advisors we hire. I think it's critical that we know exactly who we're getting when we do this. And you can't do that with them sitting in front of you for 45 minutes. You need to go there. You need to get a sense of the environment and the culture in the organization. So that's a recommendation that will be coming as part of the RFP process. Prior to that, you had indicated that you wanted to talk about what are our options in investment consulting. There's a spectrum of options that we can have here. Our current option is we have a retainer consultant. There are a number, the spectrum goes from project-based investment consultant. Retainer consultant is somewhere in the middle, I would say. Outsourced CIO model is kind of at the other end of the spectrum. So we'll plan on bringing you some education about what all the various models are in that space, and we can have a conversation about where does this board want to go. Do we want to go more project-based, or do we want to stay with the retainer, or totally outsource it? So those are options we'll consider.
Hey, James.
Yes, sir.
So I'd like to add in the fact that MSERA doesn't have on staff an investment type employee.
We
For
don't?
example, what?
We don't?
Well, at least we have an accountant.
Well, you know, he does have a KIA, so I'd say he's a little more investment than not.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to minimize that. So I really don't know what other systems do. Sarah has 2 employees that do investments. And I'm not saying that you should have 2, but I think the fact that you don't have anybody on staff makes this selection more important. And I'd be curious to know what other systems have, whether they have on staff somebody who does investments. And it really shouldn't matter the size of your system. You're talking about the most important thing that you guys do. So I just want to plant that seed a little bit.
I'm going to shoot from the hip here and operate from memory, and I'm looking to Stan to help me out here as well. In terms of the 37 Act plans, I believe there are only 2 that do not have an investment person. And that would be Mendocino and Merced. Is that?
Probably Imperial also.
And Imperial, yeah.
Oh, and Imperial? Okay,
That sounds about right to me.
okay. Yeah. So there are 3 that do not have someone dedicated to investments. And I know that to Larry, just this past year, created a CIO position for their retirement association. So that's what I think the lay of the land is now. There's a size where it may not make sense, but there may not be that situation. It may always make sense to have someone doing investments. It's something that we can definitely talk about.
So if we decided to go that route, you're talking about, as a board, going for a new staff position.
I think so. If you want to have an individual just doing investments, I think that's a new staff position. And really what it looks like in my mind is splitting Stan's position. Because right now, his title is finance/investment officer. So he does all of our accounting and all of that stuff, as well as a lot of work in the investment space.
Well, I think if we look at our standing in the Sacker's report that shows rate of return, I believe we're in the quite a ways up in the upper end of that. And I don't see a problem worth fixing. Hiring a CIO, if you're going to get one, you're gonna have to
Big
pay
money.
real money. If you
Yeah.
get a cheap one, you get a cheap one. And we're a nickel and dime pension plan. A $500 million plan is nothing. And it's just not cost effective to hire a CIO when our outside consultants are doing an amply good job, which is demonstrated by our standard.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
And especially spending money to fix it.
What's our cost for our outside consultant now on an annual basis?
Dan, what are we paying? Is it,
140, 150 a year, yeah.
yeah. And that's, they're
Without
technically-
without benefits.
what's that?
How much was that?
It's around 150,000.
Okay.
Without
I wasn't
benefits.
trying to advocate that you hire a staff person. I just wanted to explain what I see as a very important decision in terms of who your outside consultant is.
I think the investment consultant options will be an instructive conversation around this issue. And yeah, I think we'll have good conversation around that. And I'm starting to think about how do we bring that discussion to the board. But I think it's important to have. And I should say that the fee that we're paying to Callan now is their base fee. If we do an investment manager search, that's an add-on. We have to pay extra for that.
Yeah.
So it's not a full retainer fee that we're paying them. It's a base retainer plus.
Doesn't it include 1 or 2 searches a year?
I don't think that's per year. Well, it depends on how you do the search. If you want to do an RFP, then it's an extra $30,000 or $35,000. If they just bring us finalists, they don't charge us extra.
Of course, the people that bring us may be their clients.
Yes.
Tend to be.
Exactly.
Well,
Exactly.
and again, are we hurting? Are we in trouble? Are we not doing as well as other people? Sure, we might pull
Something
some
better?
money or pulling up, but we might not.
You know where I stand on this, so. Okay, so the new project here is the program review, talking about new policies, mortgage lending, direct real estate possibly, local investments, some areas for us to consider. And that has, I think it's important. We have a lot on our plate already for the rest of this fiscal year and calendar year. I don't think we have the bandwidth to take on adding some new policies right now. I think we need to get through the investment consultant RFP, then we'll do asset allocation and all that kind of stuff. And as part of that process, we can start talking about some of these other areas where we want to maybe think about doing things. So I see that as a 2019 type list of projects. I know it's not as fast as you want us to go.
Well, fine, but in the interim, before we start as a board seriously thinking about along these lines, I'd like to see us engage in conversations about the topic and start thinking about it, start being educated, opening our minds to things that a lot of the board members aren't aware of. As an example, a deal I talked to you about this morning, that it would be a perfect example, allocating some time to lay out to the board and say, here's the type of an investment opportunity that knocked on our door. But we don't have a policy, or we're not willing to spend the time to look at something that can make us a lot of money. And so, so I think we need to like talk about these things, not in terms of like, here's a hot deal, let's do it. But here is an opportunity, and let's talk about it without any thought of acting upon it, but think it through, and what questions would we ask, what questions would, and start thinking about how you would address opportunities as they come to your door.
So I'm wondering if some of that early information could be in the form of an email linked article. Like, I mean, for example, I always read the that publication that is sent through James.
Yeah.
I think it's only that the articles there are pretty helpful to understand what's going on in the pension world. If there is, I don't even know what type of investments you're talking about, but if there are some articles that kind of cover the genres that you're thinking of, could you send it to James and he could just circulate it, or Judy, and send it out to us? Because
Yeah, I mean, the types of thing that I'm thinking about are more unique investments in terms of if I as a mortgage broker, I mean, that's my business is selling loans to institutional clients. And I'll never do that with you guys because that obviously is a conflict. But for me to work with CalPERS, who has umpteen $100 billion, for me to bring them I do $100 million a year in business. For me to bring them $100 million in loan is nothing. We wouldn't be a fit at all. And the company that can bring $1 billion in loans a year to CalPERS, they won't talk to you.
right.
And so the companies that are a right fit, who would consider you a small client, but large enough to get their attention, are very few. Very few. And yet, clients in this size space can be very active in this, and it can make a big difference in their portfolio. So you're sized right to do small deals, a small deal, like $1 to $5 million, where CalPERS is a small deal to them. They want to look at anything under $50 million. Well, there are no $50 million deals around here. And I'm not saying lend in the community, but deals in Northern California, things that you can understand and, you can get your arms around and understand the picture of it. So anyway, that's
why we do mutual funds. If you go out and look for an advisor, or a manager, and you're gonna be ahead one time with them, you gotta invest 50 million or 100 million minimum to get in.
Right.
We would be having one manager for international equities probably if we didn't use a variety of mutual funds.
and those kinds of opportunities that hit the mutual funds, those are all watered down. But there's one-off opportunities where, can I tell them about this deal that I don't want to take up too much time.
I think
Just
you're
as
fine.
an example.
I mean,
So I represent a university with $1 billion endowment. And their investment manager is he's in the top 3% of all investment managers, they get certified. So they're really good at what they do. And so before the crash, they sold a bunch of stocks and decided that they would invest in apartments. So today they are partners in over 30,000 in over 30,000 apartments across the country with 5 partners. And so they vetted the partners and they hire independent. These guys know what they're doing, but they still hire independent consultants to do the vetting because of their size, they're audited. They're audited by Ernst & Young, and so they hire all the consultants to check the boxes. And they're making over 20% year over year on these apartments on cash and cash return. So anyway, so I get a call the other day, well, we're doing this one now that we're participating in. It's a $1 billion deal with the William Lyon Company on 5 very large apartment projects along the coast in Southern California. Would you like to? No, I can't do that today. But, so, that would be a perfect investment for us to put like $1 million in and probably make around, somewhere 15 to 20% in an investment that all the institutional bells and whistles have been done, all the reports, all the analysis, the kinds of things that we could say, yes, this is an institutional grade investment. You're not going to get that call from some mutual fund or the broker down the street. It just so happens that I know these guys and they asked me about it, and something I can't do right now. But I can say, call these guys, and I have absolutely no conflict of interest. The university is just merely an investor in it. That's all. And that's their deal. So those are the kinds of opportunities that can come up that you can jump on where CalPERS, they wouldn't bother to pick up the phone. But for an institution of our size to invest $1 million on a fixed rate of return that's going to give us 15 to 20%, it's worth thinking about.
And I totally agree that us talking about that before a quote deal shows up and we're either ready to act or to put our toe in is a worthwhile effort. And I think it's something that, it was a deal for Sakowitz. It's always been a thing for me to do those kind of investments. But I think, an important educational process for the entire board, because there are projects like that we just don't have history with, and everybody's a little scared. They hear a landlord story and they're scared to invest in a major apartment complex.
Right.
And I don't think that's the way we need to think about those things. We need to work with players that have track records and that we will be ready to trust.
Yeah, and stuff like that, I could get you like a copy of the due diligence package on it. You could look it over, and we could just play with one of these and play Monopoly with it, where we don't have to make a decision. We're not going to do it, but everybody gets to ask the what if questions, because real estate's not what you guys do. So,
if you take an action on this little discussion, I'd like to vote yes. I have to leave. I'm sorry.
You didn't get to vote on anything.
I got to make a motion. I recorded it.
anyway, thanks
I
for
think
your
it'd be interesting
hearing my
to get
thoughts.
educated on all of those different options. I'm not familiar with a lot of that, or if other plans, our size engage in that, those types of activities. So I think it would definitely be interesting to learn and understand more as time goes on.
Okay. We will definitely see what we can do about that.
Jim, before you close that off, I'd like to just make an observation. Looking at the very, very bottom of your thing, and life in the year 29,018 is very similar to what it was in 2018.
Oh, goodness.
It's the curse of the new year.
Yeah.
I will get that corrected, for sure.
You only put that in there just to make sure you were paying
You're
attention.
actually reading the whole thing.
And nobody was paying attention.
All the way to the end.
It's a lot of years of having the same work coming, huh?
Yeah.
That's funny.
You were young.
I have nothing else to add here. If the board's comfortable with this work plan, I'll take it off draft and we'll just start moving down the road, or continue moving down the road on this.
So it would be helpful for a motion. I think we've refined it pretty well. We've eliminated a couple things.
I move that we adopt this as our 2018 board work plan.
ask as amended through discussions.
Thank you, Dan.
I second that.
Okay. We don't need a roll call vote, do we?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thanks.
Very good.
So let me ask, we had Richard make a motion and there was a second about bringing forth some sort of an educational piece on the kind of thing that Lee presented. How or where would that happen? Or would it have to go on our work plan after another retreat or what?
I think we can potentially do that without it being a work plan item.
Okay,
We can just do it as part of a board meeting,
okay.
per se.
I would rather we not just drop it.
Okay.
I would like to.
Maybe like when a meeting that we know is going to be on one of our short schedules, and then if it was the board's pleasure, I'd give you like a half-hour sort of primer on, okay, here's some deal, here's the deal, here's how it would be done, and here's just as a kind of a show and tell example of how it's done and why it's done.
And there's that other piece about investing, at least toe in the water in our own county or something along the line of, a good sized pool of money. Is it possible to take a small portion of that and do something that would be local? And how would we consider
And the
that?
pros and cons of that, to kind of like, chew on it.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that's an FAQ. Why
Yes.
don't you invest locally? Well, there's some real good reasons why we don't. And there's some reasons why we should,
we
and
should,
for the
absolutely.
perfect opportunity, I think we could.
Yeah.
But there's a small sphere where that applies.
Okay,
Do we want to take a 5-minute break, or we want to plow ahead to?
let's plow.
Okay. So then we're on discussion possible action regarding retirement administrator report, consolidated case
I
update.
second that.
There you go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trustees, you have the
Anybody want some water?
I'm good.
the administrator's report before you. I am not going to read everything. There's been some pretty significant action recently in the consolidated case that we talked about last time. That's the Alameda, Contra Costa, and Merced counties. Both the consolidated case and the Marin case are going to end up before the California State Supreme Court, and the expectation is that the Supreme Court will make a final ruling on what the California rule truly means, and then we'll have some certainty around what plans will look like going forward. So, and if there's
Jay?
more, yes,
I didn't want to interrupt you.
go ahead.
So, James is correct that this Alameda case was headed to the Supreme Court. At least that's what the Supreme Court's intention was. Because you recall, after the Marin case, the Supreme Court said we're not gonna hear the Marin case until the Alameda case gets decided, and presumably they were gonna consolidate those. But this Alameda decision threw a little curveball into that, because it remanded the case back down to the trial court. And so now it's not quite clear procedurally what's going to happen. The other wrinkle is that there's a third case, the Cal Fire case, that deals with airtime but also vested rights that's before the Supreme Court. So one way or another, James is right that the Supreme Court is going to look at this concept of the California rule. I did want to point out one thing in the Alameda case regarding on-call and standby pay, because as you'll remember, that was the big issue for your board back in 2013, and for those of you who weren't on the board at the time. The question was whether to continue to include on-call and standby for legacy members, because Pepper said no. and the 37 Act systems were split on this issue, and this board decided to continue to include it because it saw it as a vested right. Marin's case said, no, it's not a vested right, and it may be a little bit of an oversimplification, but the Alameda court said, yes, it is. So just like the 37 Act systems being split, the courts were split too, and so we will get a final decision on that. The big issue for a lot of the systems is, if it really changes the California rule, does that mean employers could change the benefit formula for legacy members on a go-forward basis? That's like the huge issue that's out there, really. And as you guys talked about earlier in your meeting, the formula in Mendocino is not 3% at 60. So it's not really as significant for Mendocino County as it might be for some other systems. And every year that goes by, it kind of becomes less significant anyway, because a lot of your legacy folks are retiring, and it'll probably be a couple more years before you get a decision, and then it would be a while before the Board of Supervisors would, if they even wanted to, make any changes anyway. So it's kind of becoming not so significant. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents.
Okay. Andy Young and I will be presenting the annual evaluation to the Board of Supervisors next week. If you are just dying to hear Andy talk about our evaluation again, we'll be on at 9:15. As I mentioned earlier, the actuarial audit is proceeding, and there's also a memo from Sackers about Board of Directors elections taking place at the May Sackers meeting. One other thing I wanted to advise you of that's not on the report here, by our policy review schedule and everything, it's during the first quarter of this year, 2018, that we are due to get ethics training again. You have to have it every 2 years, so some of you may have had it less than 2 years ago. And Judy does a good job of keeping track of that. I did want to there is an opportunity to get it done very quickly and easily. The Mendocino County Council is offering a training. They have 2 dates, January 25th from 9 to 11, and then February 21st from 6 to 8 p.m. in Willits. If anyone's interested in doing either of those, I don't think anyone here is due right now in this quarter. I believe Sherry's due first, but Tim, I think you're due this year. So if anyone else, if you want to know when yours is due, ask Judy. She knows for sure. I've gone to the county councils before, and it's not bad. Kit does a relatively good job. So.
You can still do it online.
You can still do it online at FPPC.
That's pretty tedious.
And that's why I like the county councils a lot more.
It's interesting when it
less
talks
tedious.
about family foundation stuff.
So,
Yeah, and don't try to get out before 2 hours.
Yeah.
Right. 2 40 minutes.
Judy, was there anything else I needed to mention?
In the calipers notice that you have on your desks, you'll see a little photo there, Principles of Pension Management 2017, and congratulations to Mr. Sullivan for attending, and his photos there.
Yeah, I know.
And that's also coming up again this year. It's listed on your trustee education report.
And if you're thinking about going this year, I'm just going to apologize now.
Are you going to be
Yes.
doing the alteration?
Well, I'll be participating, so.
Participating, you give a
Faculty there for the trustee orientation.
Are you
Principles
going-
of pension management.
Are you going to the UCLA one?
No,
No,
not
okay.
this year.
You need to go to this one, that's my old stomping grounds. I used to live right down PCH from
And with that, I'll conclude my report, Mr. Chairman, unless there are any other questions or darts to be thrown. Item 6, I believe.
So we are on the general board member discussion. Any items board members want
All
to
that
bring up?
work was a little hill for brains.
I went to the marketing group seminar that they had over in Napa, and I'd recommend it. That was very good. It was very good. Kind of interesting. I would guess that 60 to 70% of the people in the room were consultants, and the rest were pension trustees. And so the presenters, I think, were talking more to their peers than they were to us. And so the level of conversation, everybody was on their game. And it was quite a high level of discussion on all the points. But it was extremely good.
I'll also throw in, the Calipers General Assembly is coming up quickly, if anyone's interested in that. It's in Indian Wells. And then Sacker's Spring Conference is in May. We haven't seen any specific details on that one yet. If you want to go to Calipers, let Judy know, and she can get you registered and help with any arrangements. So.
I'm going to the Callan conference
Okay.
for one day, and I found a hotel that was 40% less expensive than the conference hotel.
There you go.
You talked to Kit, yeah. You talked to Kit, right?
Not surprising, so.
Okay.
May want to take a break
Yeah.
before closed session.
So take a 5-minute break, we'll go into a closed session. And maybe do we report out what those items are?
Yes, we will report out.
Report out afterwards?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we'll now take a 5-minute break.
I don't know what's going on with this.
Are you not connecting to the internet or what?